international bestselling author Katherine Neville. Katherine, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Great to see you, Amanda.
You too. Katherine is the mastermind behind the immensely popular novels The Eight, A Calculated Risk, and The Magic Circle, to name a few, which are all now available as ebooks for the first time from Open Road Media. A number one international bestseller in 40 languages, The Eight, one of her beloved books, made edge-of-your-seat historical thrillers popular long before Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, and the Washington Post declared The Eight a feminist answer to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it has captivated readers since its publication in 1988. So before we jump into our questions, and kind of get into the viewer questions. Can you give us a quick overview of the three books for those who have never read them?
Oh, wow. A
Just a
daunting
brief
task.
synopsis.
Well, each of my books, as readers know all over the world, has an historic part and a modern part, and they're
Mhm.
interwoven, sort of like a tapestry. So in the
Mhm.
eight, nutshell description, there's a fabulous gold and silver bejeweled chess set that once belonged to Charlemagne, and it's been buried for 1,000 years at the beginning of the book during the French Revolution. It's dug up and
Mhm.
scattered all over the planet. And from that point, from the 1790s in the French Revolution to the 1970s during the OPEC embargo, everyone's chasing around the world looking for the chess set, trying to put it together because it contains a secret of dark, mysterious power, and everyone
Mhm.
interested in power is trying to get it. And there, to further complicate the plot if necessary, there are 32 characters in the historic part and 32 in the modern part, and they're all pieces in the chess game that's the plot of the book. And in each
Wow.
historic chapter, there's a tale within a tale where one character will turn to another in the midst of the French terror, bloodshed, violence, and mayhem and say, "Let me tell you a story." And then they'll tell a story that goes back in time to the Phoenicians or Egypt or somewhere that has additional clues to the plot. So that was my first book that got published.
Mhm.
But before I wrote that book, I finished another book called A Calculated Risk. And I had worked early in my career in the New York Stock Exchange on their
Mhm.
computers. I was a computer guru. And
Mhm.
then at the very end of my career, I worked in banking. And so I finished Calculated Risk first. But my publisher decided to publish The Eight before it because it was such a bizarre book. They didn't know who would want to read a book like this. And so Calculated Risk was published second, and it was a story about a young woman who um, runs all the security for the biggest bank in the world, and they
Mhm.
refuse to install her ideas about how to control the money. And so she
Mhm.
decides to prove her point. She decides while at the San Francisco Opera one night that she's going to uh, uh, steal $1 billion and hide it within the banking computer systems until they notice
Mhm.
it's missing, and then point out
Yeah.
how easy it was to do it. So the plot is complicated there by the
Mhm.
fact that her mentor of 10 years earlier decides to challenge her to a wager. And he says that the same problem with the stock exchange exists where they don't want adequate security. And so he challenges her, whoever can steal the billion first and invest it to make 30 million or whatever, will win the
Yeah.
bet. So there is a backstory in Calculated Risk, which takes place
Right.
during French Revolution, also during the period of the Rothschilds, and it all has to do with moving, with information being power, information being worth
Yeah.
more than money.
Mhm.
Now, a Calculated Risk I wrote in 1984. I updated it for its publication in 1992, and even though the
Mhm.
technology has all changed, the way they're stealing money is still is still the same.
Exactly.
So I keep
Yeah.
getting letters from people saying about every 5 years saying, "How did you know? How did you know they could do that?" So anyway, that's my most fun book. It's like a very baroque caper novel. Then the
Yeah.
Magic Circle. Uh, Magic Circle was a book that I started writing when I was working at a nuclear site in Idaho. Energy was my principal field in data processing. And Magic Circle is about what happens when it's called millennial behavior. But what happens when everyone, no matter when their calendar started all over the world, everyone knows that we're about to enter a new era, a new 2,000-year
Mm-hmm.
cycle, from the galactic standpoint, a new eon, they call it.
Yeah.
And the book is set, it begins in the last week in the life of Jesus. What's going
Oh.
on all over the world? What are the Hebrews doing in Judea? What are the Roman emperors doing on the Isle of Capri? What are the Druids doing in Brigantium? And
Yeah.
it's set all over the world in about 32 AD at the beginning, and it goes back and forth to 1989, which was the year of Tiananmen Square, the year of the Berlin Wall came down, and the whole concept is this sort of tidal wave of
Mm-hmm.
socioeconomic change that washes over everybody. So once again, that book came out, and right after it was published, things started happening. Real tidal waves started happening. Earthquakes started happening,
Yeah.
and when the Berlin Wall came down, it was just whoosh. The entire Soviet Empire fell apart in a very short period
Mm-hmm.
of time. So the books are all my books are about an idea, something that
Yeah.
happened in ancient past
Mm-hmm.
or even recent past, and what goes around comes around. Like one of the mottos in the beginning of Magic Circle is um, what the age returns, the motto of Lorenzo de Medici, like the new
Yeah.
age. And then I have the motto of the Hells Angels, what goes around comes around.
Yeah. Brilliant.
So it's a cyclical concept for
Yeah.
plot.
Fantastic. So how long did it take you to research and write the eight? How long was that process?
Well, I'm always saying life is research.
That's true.
I never stopped. I just got back from a research trip, as you know,
Exactly,
two and a
yeah.
half weeks, and
Mm-hmm.
really pounding the pavement. But I think it happened very quickly. I wrote the first part while I was still working at the Bank of America, and then I
Mm-hmm.
sold it to Ballantine Random House,
Yeah.
and they wanted the second half in 6 months. And so
Wow.
I wrote the entire second half of the book from where there's an axe falling right in the middle of the book on someone's throat. I won't say, because during the French terror, I won't say who it was.
Oh, wow.
But there's an axe falling that's about to cut off the head of one of our characters, and from that moment in the book on, I wrote everything in about 6 months. I
Wow.
had one glitch because I was under contract, and we already had the pub date, so I
Mm-hmm.
had to have it ready, and I had to call the editor-in-chief on the phone because a book had fallen off the shelf of the mechanics library where I did my research. And I was saying, what was Napoleon doing on such and such a day of such and such a year? Because I wanted him to meet my heroine in Corsica.
Mm-hmm.
And the book fell open to the page, and it said, on such and such an hour of such and such a day, Napoleon had taken leave from the army to go pick up his little sister Maria Elisa because they were closing her convent school. And he was taking her home to Corsica.
Oh
So
my
I called the
gosh.
editor-in-chief and I said, Bob, Napoleon just dropped into my book one chapter early and his sister's traveling with him.
Oh,
So
wow.
could I possibly have him escort my heroine to, it might take a little more time. And he said, ooh,
Mm-hmm.
that's really spooky. He said, I guess you
Yeah.
have to do it. So you know what? That change cost
It
me
was
5 weeks
kismet.
because I had to bring a lot of elements in much earlier than I planned.
Yeah.
But I went with it, I did it, and I was exactly 5 weeks late delivering the manuscript. And people
That's
were
a great.
retyping it. This is before they had computer
Right.
technology to just typeset it, and people were retyping the manuscript as so a lot of the errors that crept into the book with typos and things are because we were 5 weeks late
Yeah.
racing under the gun to get the galleys, the arcs down.
That's a
But
great
it was
story.
so much fun. Writing that book was so much fun.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned you just returned from a trip overseas. And if anyone's following your Facebook page, they know that you've been offering some little glimpses of your trip and some clues. And you were doing research for your upcoming book that we've been, teasing a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about just kind of the research without revealing too much, of course?
Oh, yeah, well, Amanda, you asked me to send, you said I'd never used Facebook before, as you know, and listen, can you send some pictures of where you are? So I'd send a picture and say, can you guess what
Yeah.
this is? And miraculously, this went on my Facebook page.
Yeah.
So, and people guessed, I couldn't, my readers, this is something people don't understand. My readers are so well read before they get to my books. And
They
when
really
my first
are.
book came out, they would write me letters and say, by the way, this quote you used from Napoleon, did you know he wrote it in a love letter to Josephine? And here's the rest of the quote. And they'd send me books and they'd send me materials. And that's how I've actually done a lot of my research since the first book came out.
Mm-hmm.
So this time I had wanted to get into a couple of archives in Europe. So I went over. I only had a few weeks between appointments that I had to finish and other appointments that go flat out for the rest of the year. And so I took 3.5 weeks and I got to Paris and I rented a car and I took off in the car
Fantastic.
and I emailed or called up everyone I'd known in Italy and France that I used to work with, and I'd worked in all these different countries. And I said, here's where I'm going to be. Can you meet me there? And
Yeah.
people arrived. They came from Rome and met me in Milan, and we would have these different dinners. And then I would spend every day, all day doing research. And I ended up out in the middle of the wilderness. I ended up in beautiful churches and different, and I got into one really incredible archive that I've been trying to see for 30 years. So that
Amazing.
information will appear. And then I found out,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know that much about modern technology, I installed huge satellite computer systems. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I found out that you can actually be in the archive without being there because they can Skype you. They can bring
Yeah.
up a document and say, do you like this document? Okay, bing, we'll send it to you. So it's really wonderful. But this opened a whole new
Yeah.
door for me. I'll feel like I'm in the archive, except I am physically going to go back in December because
Yeah.
you have to feel the paper.
Exactly. But it's amazing. Yeah, you can just with the click of a mouse or whatever, you do, you're right there. It's
Well,
amazing.
these things are things, digitalization it's a fabulous boon, but sometimes you just have to get to the physical location. And
Exactly.
now that you can do that with pictures, it's
Yeah.
really great. It's
Hmm.
really great. So it's going to change a lot, except the other thing you still have to do is be able to eat the great food while you're, while you're
Yes.
doing the research. That's really hard to do in Virginia.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The, the gelato is everywhere in Italy. Every corner. It's amazing.
Well,
That's what I
gosh, what's
enjoyed
the
the
latest
most.
reference? What's the latest restaurant you went to? I always put
Right.
food in my book. I
Oh
have
yeah.
tons and tons of recipes in my books. The heroine or the hero is always whipping up something really great to eat.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's my favorite part of it. Now, you used to be an international computer executive for 20 years, I believe. How did working in that field influence a calculated risk? Because it seems like there's a lot of parallels.
Well, a calculated risk has a lot of data processing information in it, but that is
Right.
obsolete now. I mean, for instance, the hero, in one scene, they're in the Café des Artistes, a restaurant in New York, one of my favorite restaurants. And the hero pulls out of his pocket something that he just invented, which is this small handheld pocket-sized powerful computer no one had
Yeah.
ever heard of in
Uh-huh.
1984 when I wrote the book. But the really interesting thing about books like Calculated Risk, and even more so with my more complex books, is that all the techniques and tools that I learned, it took me a long time to write my first book because I wanted to write a very, very complex interwoven book. And
Mm-hmm.
all the tools and techniques that I had, and I think I've put some of those out recently on Facebook too, were like bubble charts, which we call data flow diagrams in computers. And when I
Mm-hmm.
teach writing class, when I'm asked to go, I don't actually teach, but if I'm asked to go and share techniques with different writing groups, I always
Right.
show them some of these tools because the bubble charts show you how different things are related to each other and they're
Right.
clustered together. So
Hmm.
I don't have any hanging right here on my wall, or I would show you, but it's really fun, and I think I'm going to put some on my website.
Yeah.
I cluster a group of people who actually knew each other in history, and they actually maybe met together, had dinners together, or whatever. And
Yeah.
then I have a scene around their meeting each
They're
other.
meeting.
And then
Yeah.
one or two of them, one of them may go off from England to Italy, and another one may go to Greece. And then they'll have different clusters of people. So I create all the scenes from people who actually knew each other and wrote letters to each other. And this
Hmm.
next book's going to be so much fun because it's hard, actually. It's almost like I'm hacking through the research with a machete trying to get rid of stuff because they
Yeah.
all knew each other. They were
Yeah.
traveling, they were going to different cities and meeting with each other, and
Hmm.
it's hard to know what to leave out. That's the tough part.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing that they all kind of,
Yeah. Now the
convened.
other computer thing is there's something that we called in computers a nested loop. It's a logic system where you
Hmm.
say this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And I use that for all my tales within a tale. I have in The Eight, there's a scene where Robespierre is telling Jacques-Louis David, the painter, how
Hmm.
he, Robespierre, as a young man, had gone to visit Jean-Jacques Rousseau on the Isle of Poplars, and he'd ridden on horseback out there, and he'd taken the boat across the lake, and he'd met with Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And Rousseau had told Robespierre a story about the time that he, Jean-Jacques
Hmm.
Rousseau, had been a young man at the opera in Venice, and he met Casanova, and Casanova had revealed part of the story, part of the
Yeah.
secret of the chess set. And meanwhile, while Robespierre is telling this story to the painter David, someone is overhearing the story in the back room of the studio, and she races off to a prison and repeats the story to this other character. So it's like a five-level
Story within a
nested loop,
story
a
within
tale
it.
within a tale within a tale within a tale. And
Yeah.
that is the exact technique, even though I used computer technology to do it, that's the
Right.
exact technique that Scheherazade uses in The Thousand and One Nights.
Oh,
Remember?
wow.
Where
Yeah, it's
she tries to
fascinating.
tell a story and then someone's on the gallows and the person who tells the best story gets to save his life, and they tell a story about someone else. And so
Right.
it's a technique that's one of the oldest techniques in storytelling. And it's fun
Hmm.
to use, but it's very tricky. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't want to lose people in the labyrinth.
Exactly. Yeah, that must be hard to keep track of. We have some questions from Savvy Bookworm, and she says,
Okay.
"Hi, Catherine. I was wondering, when you were a little girl, did you have a favorite place you'd go to read or imagine and be creative?"
Oh,
That's a
what
fun
a
one.
great question. I never thought about that. Yeah, actually, I was a binge reader when I was a little girl.
Yeah.
I would read like in the summers when you didn't have assignments to read. I would read
Yeah.
like all of Galsworthy, all of the
Yeah.
Forsyte Chronicles, like 12 of them or something. And I
Wow.
would read one summer I read all of Voltaire. And I can't read like, sitting on in a lawn chair. I can't read lying in bed. I can't read sitting on the beach. So I really
Hmm.
have to have sort of a nest place to go read. Sometimes I would go in a tree because I really like to climb trees
I
and
was
and
just gonna
read.
say that I used to do that as a little girl.
And
I'd
there's
be
a
like, I'm
picture of
running away. Yeah.
there's a picture of Alice in Wonderland sitting in a tree reading a book,
It's the
and she sees the
best.
white rabbit.
Hmm.
But I think to have a little nest, and the reason I was able to write two whole books while living in a treehouse in Sausalito was the house was only 600 square feet, and it
Hmm.
had eucalyptus trees growing up through it. I have pictures of the house then and now on my website,
Yeah.
but
I
it
was gonna
was
ask
like a
you about the
nest.
treehouse.
It was all glass. There was light everywhere. I didn't need a lot of lamps. There were no curtains and things. And now I have just rescued, about 3 years ago, I rescued this incredible Japanese house that was all hand built by a famous Japanese potter
Oh,
in the
fantastic.
1960s. And it really looked a lot like the treehouse, except bigger. And so I
Hmm.
rescued it. I still have a lot of rescuing to do, I'm afraid, because it was pretty falling apart. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna set it up now. I'm gonna get rid of my regular house, and I'm going to set it up so I can just be
Yeah.
there and write my books here because the perfect, you can see everybody, but people really can't see you. You know, you're up
That's
in the
ideal. Yeah, that's the best part. And we have another question from Sophia, and she says, what is your favorite thing to do when you're not writing? So we know you like to travel, but is there anything else that you really enjoy doing when you're not under the
Well,
gun
I think,
writing?
you know, I used to love skiing and I used to love climbing trees and I used to love all these athletic things. But actually now I get most of my exercise going places to do research. And
Yeah.
when I go, like this trip that I took, I covered all of France, all of the middle part of France, and I
Mhm.
covered all of the northern part of Italy. And
Mhm.
I got into archives, I got into all these different locations, and just walking around the streets. And once, when I was at the Bank of America, uh, they had a rule they passed for
Mhm.
vacation, use it or lose it rule. So
Yeah.
and I never took vacations because as a computer person, you have to bring in computer systems by the end of December and
Yeah.
close everything out. And then you have to start the new computer systems in January. So I never even got off for holidays. So I had to use something like 13 weeks of vacation.
Wow.
So I decided that after I had to go and work in February in Europe,
Mhm.
that I would take off 5 or 6 weeks. And I took off 5 or 6 weeks. And all I did was just get on trains or rent cars and go around wherever I had once worked with people. And I'd go into the opera with them in Paris, or I'd go to something in Florence or Milan. And in between, there
Fabulous.
would be sometimes 4 or 5 days when I didn't speak the language and
Mhm.
I didn't talk to anybody except to point
Yeah.
to something on a menu for a waiter. Ideas just start forming in your brain if you do that. So sometimes
Yeah.
I always say when young people want to be writers, and they say, what's the most important quality you can have? I always say, you really have to totally love to be alone.
Yeah.
You have to
Oh,
like
absolutely.
to hear your own thoughts and your own characters speaking to you more than you like going to the movies or having dinner with friends or anything. You have to just love being alone. And that, I think it's a wonderful exercise for anybody. It's almost,
Yeah.
I won't say spiritual, but it's very ethereal, you know,
Mhm.
to move around like that. And it cleans you out, cleans your
Yeah.
brain out.
Absolutely. We have another question from Elm City Emporium, and they say, "What are the three most important ingredients for a quest novel?"
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, you have to have curiosity.
Yes.
Curiosity is number one
Yeah.
for the readers and for the author. And the reason it's important, I'll just give this one example that I always give. Um,
Mhm.
there's a fairy tale in every country where there's a rock in the middle of the road and people are tripping on the rock and breaking their wagon wheels and their horses have to go around the rock. And
Mhm.
people are cursing the rock. And finally, a boy comes along and he says, someone might be hurt by that rock. I think I better move it out of the road. So he moves the rock with great effort. And under there is a pot of gold, or the map to the pot of gold, or the map to the rainbow where the pot of gold will be found. And
Mhm.
if he hadn't been curious or wanted to interact with something, if he hadn't moved the rock, the story never would have happened. You know, the
Yeah.
adventure never would have happened. So the
Mhm.
second thing, of course, which is the key thing, is you have to be looking for something. First, you have
Yes.
to start with curiosity. Then you have to be looking for something. And then the
Mhm.
third most important thing in a quest novel that people don't realize is when you're looking for it, and a couple of people have written about this, like Paul Coelho has mentioned this
Yeah.
in some of his writing. The most important thing is um, the the different challenges that you come up against and the different tests
Mhm.
that you come up against that you have to pass in order to find the thing you're looking for change you, the
Yeah.
quester, and they
Mhm.
also change what it is that you think you found at the end. So
Yeah.
you thought you were looking for one thing, and that, in a nutshell, thank you very much, Elm, for asking that
Yeah, that
question,
was a
is
great question.
that's exactly what my next book is about. My next book is about how do we
Ah.
get transformed by going on, by not just finding the thing, or wanting to find the thing, but how we get transformed in the process of going on the quest. Actually, that's what all my books are about, but this book is a little more,
Yeah.
more seriously about it. Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, I had a quick question. Would you say that there's a piece of you in all of your characters? Or do you think it's a
Oh, yeah.
composite of, yeah?
No, you have to, people always said, well, you're really the heroine of this book, right? And I always say, yes, I am, but I'm also all the villains and all the
Yeah,
victims. Because to write fiction is very different than writing a biography or any history book. To write fiction, people who write nonfiction always think fiction writers have it easy, but because they can make things up about history. But the real challenge, and it's very, very, very difficult, is you have to be able to put yourself into that person's mind,
exactly.
and enough so that you can speak through the person's mouth. And since I
Hmm.
use so many real historic figures, it's extremely difficult. I thought I would get in a lot of trouble when I did Magic Circle because Jesus is the character along with Mary Magdalene and the whole crew.
Yeah,
And I also have Hitler, the young Hitler as the character in
yeah.
the semi-modern part. And I had to know so much about them that from, directly from the Bible. I didn't
Hmm.
diverge from biblical stories, but
Hmm.
directly from their own writings or the writings of people who knew them or the tales of people who knew them,
Hmm.
that I was able to figure out how to say something that would evoke the feeling that they were there, that they were
Yeah.
alive. Now,
Hmm.
I do that by selecting um, uh, from the actual eyewitness reports or letters that go back and forth certain things that I think project the image of who that person is. And for the young Napoleon, I have one scene in the eight where we don't know who this person is, but there's a person who's galloping. This horse is coming across the desert toward the pyramids, and you see the sand sort of coming up from under the horse's hoofs, and then he leaps off the
Hmm.
horse and he tosses his long brown hair, and he's taking off his glove finger by finger, and he's walking towards you. You know it's Napoleon.
Yes.
You don't have to say anything about it. It's his whole behavior. So,
Yeah.
so that's so there is a part of me in each character, but more, it's really sort of a schizophrenic profession to write fiction because you really
It
have to
is.
be the people. The only person where I ever felt comfortable enough with the character, with the historic figure, to put words in his mouth was Voltaire, and I have him
Yes.
saying a line that he never said, which was, "Doctors and priests should all be hanged at the same gallows." I knew he would have said it
You would
if he
have.
thought of it.
Or he would have loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely thought it. Now, Elm City has another great question, actually. I read that you collect African art. What inspired you to start doing this, and what is your favorite piece? Thanks, Elm
Oh,
City.
that's incredible. Yeah, I have a huge collection of African art, and I started collecting it. There was a man who owned department stores, whom I knew many, many years ago. And he fell in love with African art because he loved Picasso paintings and things like this. And I walked into his place one time, and there were white sheets all the way across the floor
Hmm.
of his home. And there were pieces of African art with labels, and there were brokers and people. And this is before African art became popular to collect.
Yeah.
And I just fell in love with it. And he explained to me what the different tribal uses were. And so I bought my first piece of African art when I was 20, and I still have it. It's a female Mende dancing mask from Sierra Leone, and it's still got all the sisal or whatever the fabric. And the second
Yeah.
piece I bought is a story. It's a tapestry. They weave all the tapestries by hand, and then they paint them by hand, and they sew the different pieces together. But it's the only one, it has crocodiles and fantasy animals and things in it, and it
That
takes
sounds
up a whole
beautiful.
wall. It's at my
Wow.
apartment in DC, and I bought that when I was 21. But it's the only one of these I've ever seen with a human figure in it. It's a
Yeah.
human guy
Huh.
who's walking with a bucket in one hand and a pipe in the other hand, and he's
Mm-hmm.
walking through all these animals that are floating all over. And I think he's like Uncle Remus or some ancient storyteller who's
Yeah.
life-sizing all these animals. So people have wanted to buy it and put it in museums and stuff, and I've never sold it because I think it's so interesting. I should put
So
a picture of
unique.
that on the website too.
Yeah. Wow. Beautiful. Um, so Halloween is just around the corner. It's my favorite holiday. I think it's yours too. How do you like to celebrate Halloween?
Well,
Do anything special?
this year I'm celebrating Halloween because I told you at the beginning I'm selling my actual house
Yes.
and people want to move into it. And so on Halloween morning, I'm having a huge yard sale of
Yes.
everything I don't want out on my front yard. And Halloween night, I always have I have nuts and apples and chocolates for children.
Delicious.
And I have the only Gothic house according to the National Registry, it's the only Gothic house in all of Northern Virginia. Once you get over the Maryland border, everything is Gothic because the Catholics, settled Maryland and brought all these beautiful Gothic buildings. But mine is the only Gothic house they know of in Northern Virginia. And so I always have a Halloween for the children, and I get something like 100 children
Oh my
of every
gosh.
age, little teeny children being carried by their parents, and
Oh.
teenagers and college students. And I keep score of how many children I have,
Oh.
and I always say at the end of the evening, no leftovers is our motto. Never take the food away.
Oh, that's awesome.
And this will be the last one because I won't own the house anymore after that.
Mm-hmm.
So we have Japanese Halloween after that.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's great. Wonderful. So going back to just the release of all 3 books, now they're in ebooks, which is exciting for the first time ever. Why did you decide to go ahead with that now? There's a lot of changes in the publishing world. Why did you think it was a good time to release them as ebooks?
I could have done them as ebooks a long time ago, and I decided not to because I really wanted to be sure that they were done right as ebooks, that people would, number one, know about it. It wasn't just like, yeah, you can get this in ebook too. And also, because I wanted to be sure a huge part of my readership is offshore, outside of the United States. Military people, I have State Department people, because my books are so popular in other countries, they might not even have heard of my books in America. They get to see where I'm one of the top 10 authors of all time, and non-published authors. And so they'll get there, and they'll say, oh my gosh, I have to read these books. And it's very hard. People cannot carry books on airplanes.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything that, I write big, thick books. So people don't want to carry all that. And then when they get over there, if they have them, they have to leave them. You can't bring them back.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Also, the other reason I wanted to do ebooks is my readership from the very beginning, from 25 years ago, has been people who read books over and over. They don't just read my books once and toss them or pass them on. They read them 17 times, 25 times, 32 times. And I know that, and they write me about it. And paperbacks fall apart. You can't read them that many times. So I thought, if they're going to read them, they want to go back. Sometimes they go back and they read all the historic chapters in a row, and then they read all the modern chapters in a row to see how they fit together. And I thought it would just be great for them to be able to do that in a electronic format.
Yeah, make it accessible to everybody.
So it'll be fun to see what happens and what different kinds of readers come from the audience of, because as I said to you at the very beginning, my readers are really, historically, have been really knowledgeable about all kinds of things. Even you left one ingredient out of this recipe, or you left a match.
Wow.
There was one chess piece missing in this page, and
tough critics.
Yeah, they really know. and they know down to the word almost, because the thing I've most frequently been told from people who interviewed me from the very beginning is that they would say, your books make me feel like I'm walking around inside the book, like I'm part of the story,
Yeah.
which is a great feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
they'd say, I remember one interviewer said, you make all these characters, these figures like Catherine the Great and Talleyrand and Napoleon's grandmother, you make them all seem so real. And I'd
Yeah.
say, well, they were real. And there would be a
Yeah.
pause, and they'd go, oh, yeah, yeah, of course they were.
Yeah.
So, so that's the goal. And I think that with an ebook, you can go back and forth and really get to know the characters. I think it's just going
Exactly.
to be a very different experience for me as a writer to get feedback from
Yeah.
people.
Fantastic. Yeah. Now, last question before we wrap up, from Sophia, which kind of goes along with the characters. If you could meet one of the characters that you've written about and have a conversation, which one would you like to meet? I think that's a tough one.
Well, I haven't actually written much about him, but the one character of the periods I've been writing about that I would really love to meet, to have dinner with, let's put it that way, is
Mm-hmm.
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. I
Ah.
mean, I love Goethe. Wolfgang Goethe is the only
Mm-hmm.
author whose picture I always have on my wall, no matter where my study is, because he was a big influence on me when I was very, very young.
Right.
He taught me alchemy too. I mean, he studied
Yeah.
alchemy, studied Persian poetry, and
Mm-hmm.
all the things that influenced me. But I don't think he would have been that much fun to have dinner with. He lived, I went to his house in Weimar. He lived in like the
Oh,
root
awesome.
cellar. He had this big, impressive house, but he lived
Really?
down in the garden near the cottage garden in a little cell. But Mozart, I think, would have been so
Yes.
much fun.
I agree.
He'd play the piano at your party. He'd be
Yes.
laughing it up. He had a
Yep.
fantastic sense of humor. So yeah, I'd
Carousing.
like to have dinner with Mozart.
That's fantastic. Great answer. And I just want to thank you again for coming on and talking about the books with us. And I want
Oh,
to
it's
thank
my
all
pleasure.
the viewers, yeah, for asking questions. And thanks so much, guys. Thank you, Catherine. Take
Thank
care,
you. Thank all
everybody.
of you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.